The dust swirled around Zelda Owens's worn boots as she stumbled into Central City, Colorado, clutching the thick woolen shawl tighter around her middle, praying no one would notice the gentle swell beneath the layers of fabric that marked her 5th month of carrying a child she never thought she would raise alone. It was August of 1878, and the mining town sprawled across the mountainous terrain like a collection of weathered toys scattered by a giant's hand. The altitude made her breathless, or perhaps that was just the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her chest. She had traveled 3 weeks from Kansas, leaving behind everything she had ever known, fleeing from the shame that would have consumed her if she had stayed. Her family's faces still haunted her dreams, the way her father's expression had hardened when she told him about the baby, about how the man she loved had disappeared without a trace, leaving her with nothing but broken promises and a life growing inside her. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly despite the mountain air's chill, and Zelda found herself seeking shelter under the awning of a general store. Her funds were nearly depleted, just enough for maybe a week's worth of food if she was careful, and then she would need to find work. But who would hire a pregnant woman with no husband and no references? She had claimed widowhood on her journey here, spinning a tale of a mining accident that had claimed her fictional husband's life, and she would need to maintain that story if she hoped to survive in this rough town. "You look like you could use some water, madam," a voice said from beside her, deep and warm like honey dripping from a comb. Zelda turned to find herself looking into the kindest pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty work shirt, and dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends beneath his worn hat. His face was tanned from hours in the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though at the moment his expression was one of genuine concern. "I am quite all right, thank you," she managed to say, though her voice came out more parched than she intended. He studied her for a moment, those gray eyes taking in details she wished he would not notice. Then he tipped his hat politely. "Name's Reed Owens, madam. I work at the Silver Star Ranch just outside of town. You look like you have been traveling a long while." The coincidence of their shared surname was not lost on her, but she did not comment on it. "Zelda," she offered, leaving off her last name intentionally. "Zelda Morrison." The lie came easily now after weeks of practice. Morrison had been her grandmother's maiden name, far enough removed that no one here would make connections. Reed nodded slowly, and something in his expression told her he sensed there was more to her story than she was telling. But he was gentleman enough not to press. "Well, Miss Zelda Morrison, I still think you could use some water, and maybe something to eat. The boarding house up the street serves a decent meal if you have not already arranged lodging." Her pride warred with her practicality, and practicality won. She had not eaten since morning, sharing a dry biscuit with a fellow traveler on the stagecoach, and her stomach had been reminding her of that fact for the past 2 hours. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Owens. I confess I am rather famished." He offered his arm, which she took hesitantly, and they walked together up the dusty Main Street. Central City was bustling with activity, miners heading to and from the various operations that dotted the mountainside, merchants hawking their wares, and women in various states of respectability going about their business. Zelda kept her shawl wrapped tightly around herself, grateful for the bulk it provided to disguise her condition. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days, but appeared clean and well-maintained. Reed held the door open for her, and they entered a dining room that smelled wonderfully of roasted meat and fresh bread. Zelda's mouth watered involuntarily. "Mrs. Fletcher," Reed called to a plump woman in her 50s who was wiping down tables. "This is Miss Morrison. She has just arrived in town and could use a good meal and perhaps a room, if you have one available." Mrs. Fletcher looked Zelda up and down with the shrewd gaze of a woman who had seen every type of person pass through her establishment. But whatever she saw in Zelda's face must have satisfied her, because she smiled warmly. "Of course, dear. Sit yourself down and I will bring you some stew. Just made it fresh this morning. And yes, I have a room on the second floor, faces east, so you will get the morning sun. $3 a week, meals included." $3 would eat through Zelda's remaining funds quickly, but she had little choice. She nodded her acceptance and allowed Reed to guide her to a table near the window. He pulled out her chair like a proper gentleman, and she found herself wondering about this kind stranger who shared her real surname. "You do not have to stay," she told him as he settled into the chair across from her. "You have already been more than generous." "I would like to, if you do not mind the company," Reed said. "It is not often we get newcomers to Central City, and I confess I am curious about what brings a lady like yourself to our rough town." The stew arrived before she had to answer, steaming and fragrant, with chunks of beef and vegetables in a rich broth. Mrs. Fletcher also brought fresh bread and butter, and Zelda had to restrain herself from falling upon the food like a starving animal. She ate slowly, mindful of her manners, but she could feel Reed's eyes on her, watching with that same concerned expression. "I am widowed," she said between bites, offering the lie she had rehearsed. "My husband was a miner in Kansas. There was an accident 6 months ago. I have no family there anymore, so I thought I might start fresh somewhere new." It was close enough to the truth that it came out smoothly, though her heart ached at the deception. But what choice did she have? The truth would mark her as a fallen woman, and no respectable establishment would take her in. Reed was quiet for a moment, and she could see him calculating something in his mind. 6 months is a long time to wait before moving, he observed gently. Kansas to Colorado is not such a difficult journey that it would take that long to arrange. She had anticipated this question. I was not ready to leave before now. The pain was too fresh, but staying there, surrounded by memories, it became unbearable. He nodded, seeming to accept this, though she caught a flicker of something in his eyes that suggested he suspected more than she was saying. "Central City is a good place for fresh starts," he said. "Lots of folks here are running from something or towards something. Nobody judges too harshly." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Zelda found herself relaxing slightly in his presence. There was something solid and trustworthy about Reed Owens, something that made her want to trust him despite her determination to keep everyone at arm's length. "What will you do for work?" he asked as she finished her stew. "If you do not mind me asking, $3 a week for lodging plus food and other necessities, it adds up quickly." This was the question that had kept her awake at night during her journey. "I can sew," she said, "and I can read and write, do figures. I had hoped there might be a shop that needs help, or perhaps someone who needs a seamstress." Reed seemed to consider this. "Mrs. Henderson runs a dress shop on the next street over. She is always complaining about having too many orders and not enough hands to complete them. I could introduce you if you like." Hope bloomed in Zelda's chest, fragile as a spring flower. "That would be wonderful, Mr. Owens. I cannot thank you enough for your kindness." "Reed," he corrected gently. "Just Reed, and it is no trouble at all. My mama raised me to help folks when I can, and you look like you could use a friend in this town." Something about the way he said it, so simple and sincere, made Zelda's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back quickly, but not before Reed noticed. His expression softened further, if that was even possible. "Hey now," he said quietly. Whatever you are running from, you are safe here. I promise you that." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let down her guard and tell him everything, but the risk was too great. Instead, she simply nodded and took a sip of the water Mrs. Fletcher had brought with the meal. They stayed at the boarding house for another hour, with Reed telling her about Central City, about the mines and the people and the rhythms of life in this mountain town. He spoke of the Silver Star Ranch where he worked, one of the few cattle operations in the area, since most of the land was better suited for mining than grazing. He had been in Central City for 3 years, having come from Texas originally, looking for a change of pace from the sprawling ranches down south. "Texas did not suit you?" Zelda asked, genuinely curious. Reed shrugged. "It was not that. More like I needed to see what else was out there. My family has a ranch outside of San Antonio, been in the family for generations. But I am the youngest of 5 brothers, and there was not much need for me there. So I headed north, saw some country, and ended up here. The mountains suit me better than the flat plains, I think." There was something in his voice when he spoke of his family, a warmth that made Zelda's heart ache for what she had lost. Her own family had been close once, before everything fell apart, before she had made the mistake that led to her current situation. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Reed finally rose to leave. "I will come by tomorrow morning," he said. "Around 9, if that suits you. I will take you to meet Mrs. Henderson about the sewing position." "You have already done so much," Zelda protested, though she was grateful for his offer. "It is settled," Reed said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Besides, I want to make sure you get settled properly. Central City can be rough on newcomers if they do not have someone to show them the ropes." After he left, Zelda paid Mrs. Fletcher for her first week's lodging and was shown to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. It had a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a chipped pitcher and bowl, and a small window that looked out over the street. It was more than she had hoped for, and she found herself fighting back tears again as she sat on the bed. Her hands went automatically to her belly, feeling the small swell beneath her dress. The baby had started moving recently, little flutters that reminded her constantly of the new life she carried. She had been terrified when she first realized she was pregnant, had spent weeks in denial before finally accepting the truth. The father, a charming drifter named Thomas, who had swept her off her feet with pretty words and prettier promises, had disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. She had been foolish, had believed him when he said they would marry, had given herself to him thinking their love was real. The shame of it had been crushing. Her father had raged, her mother had wept, and her siblings had looked at her with a mixture of pity and disappointment. In the end, leaving had been the only option. She could not bear to watch her family's reputation crumble because of her mistake, could not stand the whispers and the pointing fingers that would follow her child throughout its life. So she had taken what little money she had saved, packed a small bag, and set out for somewhere new. Somewhere she could reinvent herself as a respectable widow, give her child a chance at a normal life. It was not much of a plan, but it was all she had. That night, Zelda lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the evening. Somewhere nearby, a piano played a jaunty tune, and voices drifted up from the street below. She thought about Reed Owens, about his kind eyes and gentle manner. He was exactly the sort of man she should avoid, the sort who might look too closely and see through her carefully constructed lies. But something about him made her feel safe, and she had not felt safe in a very long time. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Zelda woke to sunlight streaming through her east-facing window just as Mrs. Fletcher had promised. She washed and dressed carefully, choosing her most respectable dress, a dark blue cotton that she had let out slightly to accommodate her growing belly. The shawl went over it, draped artfully to disguise her shape, and she pinned her honey-colored hair up in a neat bun. Reed arrived promptly at 9, looking freshly scrubbed and wearing a clean shirt. He smiled when he saw her, and she noticed how it transformed his face from merely handsome to something approaching beautiful. "Morning, Miss Morrison," he greeted. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Thank you again for your help." They walked together through the morning bustle of Central City, and Reed pointed out various establishments as they passed. The assay office, the post office, several saloons that she should probably avoid, and finally, a small shop with a hand-painted sign that read Henderson's Fine Dresses and Alterations. The shop was narrow but deep, with bolts of fabric lining shelves along the walls and a dress form standing in the window, displaying a lovely green silk gown. A woman in her 40s looked up from the counter where she was pinning a pattern, her dark hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical style. "Reed Owens," she said with a smile. "What brings you to my establishment? Do not tell me you need a new dress." Reed laughed, the sound warm and rich. "Not today, Mrs. Henderson. I wanted to introduce you to Miss Morrison. She is new to town and looking for work. She is a skilled seamstress." Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up with interest, and she set down her pins to come around the counter. "Is that so? Can you do more than basic repairs? I need someone who can do fine work, delicate stitching and embroidery." "I can," Zelda said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "I have been sewing since I was a child. My mother taught me, and I helped her with her dressmaking business back home." "Show me your hands," Mrs. Henderson commanded, and Zelda obediently held them out. The older woman examined them carefully, noting the calluses that marked long hours with a needle, the steadiness of her fingers. "All right. I have a dress that needs finishing, lots of delicate work on the bodice. You do a good job on that, and we can talk about regular employment." Hope surged through Zelda, but she kept her expression composed. "When would you like me to start?" "Right now, if you can. The dress is for the mayor's wife, and she wants it finished by the end of the week." Mrs. Henderson was already moving toward the back of the shop, and Zelda followed, glancing back at Reed. He gave her an encouraging nod. "I will check on you later," he said. "Good luck." The next several hours passed in a blur of needle and thread. Mrs. Henderson's test was indeed challenging. Intricate beadwork on a burgundy silk bodice that required patience and a steady hand. But Zelda lost herself in the familiar rhythm of the work, her fingers moving with practiced ease. It felt good to be doing something productive, something that required focus and kept her mind from dwelling on her troubles. Mrs. Henderson checked on her progress periodically, and Zelda could see the approval growing in the older woman's eyes. By the time the afternoon light began to fade, the bodice was nearly complete, the beadwork forming an elegant pattern that caught the light beautifully. "You have skill," Mrs. Henderson said, examining the work closely. "More than skill, actually. You have an artist's touch." "Where did you say you learned?" "My mother," Zelda repeated, keeping her story simple. "She was a dressmaker in Kansas." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "Well, Miss Morrison, I would be happy to have you work here. I can offer you $2 a day, 6 days a week. The work is not always steady, but right now I have more orders than I can handle alone." $2 a day was more than Zelda had dared to hope for. It would cover her lodging at Mrs. Fletcher's with some left over for savings and other necessities. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "I accept gladly." "Good. You can start tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." Mrs. Henderson smiled, the expression softening her stern features. "And Miss Morrison, welcome to Central City." As Zelda walked back to the boarding house, she felt lighter than she had in months. She had shelter, she had work, and she had met two kind people who had helped her without asking for anything in return. Perhaps she really could make a fresh start here, could build a life for herself and her baby. Reed was waiting for her on the porch of the boarding house, sitting in one of the wooden chairs that lined the front. He stood when he saw her, his face breaking into a smile. "I take it things went well?" he asked. "She hired me," Zelda said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "I start tomorrow." "That is wonderful," Reed said, and he sounded genuinely pleased. "I knew she would see your quality. Mrs. Henderson is tough, but she knows talent when she sees it." They stood there for a moment, the evening settling around them, and Zelda found herself not wanting him to leave. It was a dangerous feeling, this pull towards someone who was still essentially a stranger, but she could not seem to help it. "Would you like to have dinner?" Reed asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Mrs. Fletcher's cooking is good, and I would enjoy the company." She knew she should say no, should maintain some distance, but the prospect of eating alone in her room with only her thoughts for company was unbearable. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." They ate together in the dining room, and this time the conversation flowed more easily. Reed told her stories about the ranch, about the cattle they raised and the hands who worked there. He spoke of the owner, an older man named Samuel Hart, who had built the Silver Star from nothing and treated his workers like family. Zelda found herself laughing at his stories, relaxing in a way she had not been able to in months. "You have a beautiful laugh," Reed said suddenly, and then seemed surprised that he had spoken the thought aloud. A faint color rose in his cheeks. Zelda felt her own face warm. "Thank you," she said softly. "I have not had much cause to laugh lately." "Well, we will have to remedy that," Reed said with determination. "Everyone needs laughter in their life." Over the next few weeks, a routine established itself. Zelda would work at Mrs. Henderson's shop from morning until late afternoon, focusing on the endless stream of dresses and alterations that came through. The work was demanding but satisfying, and she was grateful for it. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a fair employer, quick to praise good work and patient when teaching Zelda new techniques. In the evenings, Reed would often be waiting at the boarding house, and they would share dinner together. Sometimes he would walk her around town, pointing out new sights, introducing her to other residents. She met the baker, who always had a kind word and sometimes slipped her an extra roll. The postmaster, who told terrible jokes but had a good heart. The blacksmith, whose wife was expecting their fifth child and commissioned a dress from Mrs. Henderson's shop. Zelda kept her shawl wrapped around herself always, layering it carefully to hide the growing swell of her belly. She was 6 months along now, and though she was still small for her term, she knew it would not be much longer before her condition became obvious. The thought filled her with anxiety that kept her awake at night. What would people say when they realized she was pregnant? Would they believe her widow story? Would they turn on her? Reed never mentioned her shape, never asked questions about the shawl she wore even on warm days. But sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something thoughtful and a little sad. One evening in early September, they were walking along the edge of town where the buildings gave way to the wild mountain landscape. The aspens were beginning to turn gold, and the air had a crisp edge that spoke of the coming autumn. Reed had been quieter than usual during dinner, and now he seemed to be wrestling with something. "Miss Morrison," he said finally, stopping to face her. "Zelda, I need to say something, and I hope you will not take offense." Her heart began to race, anxiety flooding through her. This was it, she thought. He was going to confront her about her lies, about the pregnancy she thought she had hidden so carefully. "I have noticed," Reed continued, his voice gentle but firm, that you are always cold, that you wear that shawl even when the day is warm. And I have noticed other things too. The way you move sometimes, careful like, the way your face goes pale at certain smells. Zelda felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, clutching the shawl tighter. I do not know what you mean, she said, but the words came out weak. Reed took a step closer, his gray eyes searching her face. I grew up on a ranch, Zelda. I have 5 sisters-in-law and I have watched each of them go through their pregnancies. I know the signs. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and sudden. She turned away from him, unable to bear the judgment she was certain would be in his expression. I should go, she whispered. I should leave Central City before everyone finds out what I am. What you are. Reed's voice was sharp now, almost angry. What you are is a brave woman who is trying to make a life for herself and her child. What you are is someone who deserves respect and help, not judgment. She spun back to face him, tears streaming down her face now. You do not understand. I am not a widow. There was no mining accident. I am exactly what you think I am. A woman who made a terrible mistake and is now paying for it. Reed's expression did not change, did not harden with condemnation as she had expected. Instead, he looked at her with the same kindness he had shown from the beginning. I do not think you are anything except someone who needs help, and I do not care about the circumstances that led you here. I care about you, Zelda. I have cared about you since that first day when you looked so lost and alone. You should not, she said desperately. I am ruined, Reed. No respectable man would want anything to do with me. I have a child coming, a child with no father. That child has no father right now, Reed interrupted, his voice strong and certain. But that does not have to stay true. A child needs a father's love, Zelda. And you need someone to stand beside you to help you through what is coming. She stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. What are you saying? Reed took both of her hands in his grip warm and steady. I am saying that I want to marry you. I want to give your child my name, raise him or her as my own. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. You barely know me, Zelda protested, even as hope began to bloom in her chest, fragile and terrifying. I know enough, Reed said. I know that you are strong and brave. I know that you work hard and you are kind to everyone you meet. I know that you have been through something difficult, and instead of giving up, you got on a stage and traveled to a new place to make a fresh start. I know that when you smile, it feels like the sun coming out. And I know that I have been falling in love with you a little more each day since we met. The tears were flowing freely now, but they were different tears, tears of relief and joy and fear all mixed together. I was so scared, she whispered, so scared of what would happen when people found out. I thought I could hide it until after the baby came, and then maybe people would believe my widow's story. But I am already showing, and soon everyone will know. Then let them know you are married to me, Reed said. Let them see that you have a husband who loves you and wants to care for you. We can say we married quickly before you came here, that you were waiting for me to get settled before joining me. No one needs to know any different. But the baby, Zelda said. When it comes, they will know it is not yours. The timing will be wrong. Reed shrugged. Babies come early sometimes. And frankly, I do not care what people think. Let them whisper if they want. We will know the truth, and the truth is that this child will be mine in every way that matters. Zelda searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. But all she saw was sincerity and a deep tenderness that made her heart ache. Could she really accept this gift he was offering? Could she let herself believe that she deserved this kind of rescue? Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this for me? For a child that is not yours? Because I love you, Reed said simply. I think I started loving you that first day, though I did not realize it at the time, and because I know what it is like to feel lost and alone. When I left Texas, I was running from expectations, from the feeling that I did not fit into the life my family had planned for me. I came here looking for something, though I did not know what. And then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall into the safety he was offering. But years of her father's stern lessons about consequences and responsibility held her back. "I cannot let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes," she said quietly. "It is not a sacrifice if I want to do it," Reed countered. "And it is not about your mistakes, it is about our future, about the life we could build together. I am not asking you to love me right away, Zelda. I know that takes time. I am just asking you to give me a chance to prove that I can be a good husband to you and a good father to your child." The wind picked up, rustling through the aspen leaves, and Zelda closed her eyes. She thought about the months ahead, about giving birth alone in a boarding house room, about trying to raise a child with no support and limited resources. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself before everything went wrong, the dreams of a husband and family and a home filled with love. And she thought about Reed, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious, about his patience and kindness, and the way he made her feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Yes," she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Reed's face was like sunrise over the mountains, bright and full of promise. He pulled her into his arms, holding her gently, and Zelda let herself lean into his strength. The baby chose that moment to kick, a firm movement that Reed must have felt because he pulled back slightly, his hand going to where hers rested on her belly. "May I?" he asked, and when she nodded, he splayed his fingers across the swell. The baby kicked again, and Reed's eyes widened with wonder. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am going to be your papa." Fresh tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks, but these were tears of joy. She had been so afraid, so certain that her life was over before it had really begun. And now here was this man, this impossibly kind man, offering her not just redemption but love. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Fletcher standing as witnesses. Zelda wore a new dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, a soft gray silk that draped gracefully over her growing belly. Reed wore his best suit, and when he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure. The Reverend blessed their union, and when Reed kissed her for the first time as his wife, Zelda felt something shift inside her. It was not love yet, not the overwhelming passion that she had felt for Thomas. But it was something deeper, more solid. It was trust and gratitude, and the first tender shoots of affection that she suspected would grow into something beautiful given time. Reed had arranged for them to move into a small house on the edge of town, a 2-room cabin that belonged to the Silver Star Ranch and had been sitting empty. It was modest but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out toward the mountains. He had furnished it simply, a bed and table and chairs, a rocking chair that he said would be useful once the baby came. "It is not much," he said as he carried her over the threshold. "But it is ours, and we can make it into a home." "It is perfect," Zelda said, and she meant it. After months of uncertainty and fear, she finally had a place where she belonged. That night, Reed was gentle and patient, giving her time to adjust to this new reality. He held her as she cried, releasing months of pent-up terror and grief. He told her stories about his family in Texas, about his childhood on the ranch and the dreams he had for their future. And when she finally fell asleep in his arms, She slept more soundly than she had since before she realized she was pregnant. The next morning, they walked into town together to face the world as a married couple. There were some curious looks, some whispered questions about the quick courtship and quicker wedding. But Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Fletcher, bless them, had apparently spread the word that Reed and Zelda had been corresponding for months, that she had been waiting in Kansas for him to get established before joining him in Central City. Such a romantic story, Mrs. Fletcher told anyone who would listen. Young love, separated by distance but determined to be together. Most people seemed willing to believe it, or at least willing to accept it without too many questions. Reed's good reputation in town helped, as did the fact that Zelda had proven herself a skilled and hard-working seamstress. Mrs. Henderson made it clear that anyone who had a problem with Zelda would have to answer to her. And since Mrs. Henderson was one of the most respected businesswomen in Central City, that silenced most of the potential gossips. Zelda continued working at the dress shop, though Mrs. Henderson insisted she take frequent breaks and not overdo it. Reed went back to his work at the Silver Star Ranch, but he made sure to be home every evening for dinner. They established routines, learning each other's habits and preferences, building the foundation of a marriage. Slowly, over the weeks that followed, Zelda began to relax. She no longer wore the thick shawl constantly, allowing herself to show her pregnancy openly. Reed was attentive and caring, his hand often resting on her belly to feel the baby move. He talked to the child constantly, telling stories and singing songs in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. "You are going to spoil this baby before it even arrives," Zelda teased one evening as Reed knelt beside her chair, his lips close to her belly. "Is that even possible?" Reed asked with a grin. "I am just making sure our child knows it is loved and wanted. Our child." The way he said it, with such certainty and pride, made Zelda's heart swell. She found herself falling in love with her husband, not in the wild, reckless way she had loved Thomas, but in a deeper, steadier way that felt like coming home. One evening in late October, when the first snow had dusted the mountain peaks and the air had turned truly cold, Reed came home from the ranch with an excited expression. "Samuel wants to make me foreman," he announced as soon as he walked through the door. "The current foreman is retiring, and Samuel says I have proven myself capable. It means better pay, better hours, and eventually we could build a bigger house, maybe have some land of our own." Zelda threw her arms around him as much as her belly would allow. "That is wonderful news." "You deserve it, Reed. You work so hard." He kissed her soundly, his joy infectious. "Things are coming together, Zelda. Our life is really starting." That night, as they lay in bed with Reed's hand resting on her belly, Zelda felt a contentment she had never known. The baby was due in about 2 months, and instead of facing that terrifying prospect alone, she had a husband who loved her and was excited to become a father. She had a home, work she enjoyed, friends in town. She had been given a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. The weeks passed, autumn giving way to early winter. Zelda's belly grew large and unwieldy, making it difficult to sit at her sewing for long periods. Mrs. Henderson finally insisted she stop working in mid-November, promising that her position would be waiting for her after the baby came and she had recovered. Reed had become overprotective, worrying about everything from how much she ate to whether she was staying warm enough. It was endearing, if occasionally frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one evening when he fussed over her lifting a pot of stew from the stove. "I know," he said sheepishly. "I just want everything to be perfect. I want you and the baby to be safe." She softened, taking his face in her hands. "We are safe, Reed. Thanks to you, we are safe and loved. You have given us everything." "You have given me everything," he countered. "You have made me happier than I ever thought I could be." They kissed, slow and sweet, and Zelda marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had arrived in Central City alone and afraid, and now she was married to a wonderful man who treated her like she was precious. In early December, with snow falling steadily outside their cabin, Zelda went into labor. It was early morning and Reed had just left for the ranch. The first pain doubled her over, sharp and intense, and she knew immediately what it meant: Mrs. Fletcher had agreed to act as midwife when the time came, so Zelda wrapped herself in her coat and made her way carefully into town. The boarding house was only a 10-minute walk, but it felt like miles with the contractions coming stronger and closer together. Mrs. Fletcher took one look at her and sprang into action, sending a boy to fetch Reed from the ranch and settling Zelda into a room upstairs. "Everything will be fine, dear," she said soothingly. "First babies take their time. You have hours yet." But Zelda's baby seemed determined to prove that wrong. The labor progressed quickly, faster than Mrs. Fletcher had expected. Reed burst through the door 3 hours later to find Zelda already in the final stages, her face drenched with sweat and her hands gripping Mrs. Fletcher's. "I am here," he said, rushing to her side. "I am right here, Zelda." She clung to his hand, finding strength in his presence. The pain was overwhelming, worse than anything she had imagined, but Reed talked her through it, his voice steady and calm even though his face was pale with worry. "You can do this," he told her. "You are the strongest woman I know. Just a little more, love. Just a little more." And then, with a final push that felt like it might split her apart, the baby was born. A thin, wailing cry filled the room and Mrs. Fletcher laughed with delight. "It is a boy," she announced, wrapping the infant in clean cloths. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Zelda's arms, and Zelda looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature she had carried for 9 months. He was perfect, with dark hair plastered to his head and eyes that seemed to look right at her. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am your mama." Reed leaned over them both, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "He is beautiful," he said in awe. "He is absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold your son?" Zelda asked, and Reed nodded, taking the baby carefully as if he were made of spun glass. The sight of her husband holding her child, looking at him with such love and wonder, made Zelda's heart overflow. This was her family now. This was what she had been given, this second chance at happiness. "What should we name him?" Reed asked, unable to take his eyes off the baby. They had discussed names during Zelda's pregnancy, but now that the baby was actually here, those discussions seemed abstract. Zelda looked at her son, trying to see who he would become. "James," she said finally. "James Reed Owens, after your father and you." Reed looked up at her, and she saw the depth of his emotion in his expression. Naming the baby after Reed's father was a way of fully claiming him as theirs, of making him part of Reed's family. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I am sure," Zelda said. "He is your son, Reed. In every way that matters, he is yours." Reed leaned down and kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "James Reed Owens," he said softly. "Welcome to the world, son. Your mama and I love you more than you will ever know." The recovery was difficult, and Zelda was grateful for Mrs. Fletcher's care and Reed's constant presence. He had taken time away from the ranch to be with them, sleeping in a chair beside their bed so he could help with the baby during the night. He changed James's diapers without complaint, walked him when he cried, and sang to him in that deep, soothing voice. When they finally brought James home to their cabin a week later, it felt like their family was complete. The rocking chair Reed had bought saw constant use as Zelda nursed the baby, or Reed rocked him to sleep. The tiny cabin was filled with the sounds of James's cries and coos, and though they were exhausted, they were also deeply happy. Word spread through Central City that the Owens had a new baby, and neighbors stopped by with gifts and congratulations. If anyone thought it strange that James had arrived only a few months after the wedding, they kept it to themselves. The story of Reed and Zelda's long-distance courtship had apparently taken hold, and most people simply accepted that James had been conceived shortly before Zelda came to Colorado. Christmas came and went, their first as a family. Reed carved a simple wooden rattle for James, and Zelda made him several soft blankets. They attended Christmas service at the church, with James bundled in Zelda's arms, and afterward, several women came up to admire the baby and offer advice on motherhood. As winter deepened and the snow piled high around their cabin, Zelda found herself marveling at how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been living in Kansas with her family, naive and innocent. 6 months ago, she had been terrified and alone, fleeing from shame. And now she was a wife and mother, with a husband who adored her and a son who was thriving. One evening in late January, with James finally asleep in the cradle Reed had built beside their bed, Zelda and Reed sat together by the fire. She was nestled against his side, his arm around her shoulders, and they watched the flames dance in comfortable silence. "Are you happy?" Reed asked quietly. Zelda turned to look at him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. For all his strength and confidence, he still worried that he was not enough for her, that she might regret accepting his proposal. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," she told him honestly. "When I came to Central City, I was running from my past, convinced that my life was ruined. And then I met you and you gave me everything. A home, a family, love. You saved me, Reed." "We saved each other," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I was adrift before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You and James, you have given my life purpose and meaning." "I love you," Zelda said, and she realized it was the first time she had said those words to him. "I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid. Afraid that if I let myself love you, something would go wrong and I would lose you. But I cannot keep it in anymore. I love you, Reed Owens. I love you with everything I am." Reed's face lit up with joy, and he cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too," he said fiercely. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until the day I die." They kissed, slow and deep, a kiss that spoke of commitment and passion and the promise of all the years to come. And as they pulled apart, James let out a small cry from his cradle, as if to remind them that he was there and wanted attention. They laughed and went to their son together, Reed lifting him gently while Zelda settled into the rocking chair. She nursed James while Reed watched, his hand resting on her shoulder, and in that moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Reed's position as foreman at the Silver Star Ranch brought stability and respect. He was good at his job, fair to the hands who worked under him, and innovative in his management of the cattle. Samuel Hart came to rely on him more and more, and when Samuel's health began to fail in the spring of 1882, he offered to sell the ranch to Reed. It took careful planning and all their savings, plus a loan from the bank, but by summer they owned the Silver Star. It was overwhelming and terrifying and absolutely wonderful. Reed threw himself into running the ranch, expanding their herds and improving their breeding stock. Zelda continued her sewing work from home, taking on special commissions that allowed her to contribute financially while still caring for James. James grew into a lively, curious child with Reed's gray eyes and Zelda's honey-colored hair. He toddled around the ranch, fascinated by the horses and cattle, and Reed was endlessly patient in teaching him about animals and ranching. To watch them together, no one would ever guess that Reed was not James's biological father. The bond between them was deep and genuine, built on love and daily care. In the spring of 1883, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. She was nervous at first, worried about how James would react to a sibling, but Reed was overjoyed. This time, there was no fear or shame, only excitement and anticipation. "Our family is growing," he said, his hand on her still flat belly. "I cannot wait to meet this new little one." Their daughter was born in November of 1883, a healthy girl with dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into a deep blue. They named her Sarah, after Reed's mother, and James was fascinated by his new sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, talking to her in his 3-year-old babble and bringing her his favorite toys. The ranch continued to prosper, and by 1885 they were able to build a larger house, a proper 2-story home with 4 bedrooms and a big kitchen where Zelda could cook for the ranch hands who worked for them. They hired more help, reliable men who treated Reed with respect and Zelda with courtesy. Life fell into a pleasant rhythm. Zelda balanced her sewing work with raising the children and helping Reed with the ranch accounts. Reed managed the daily operations of the ranch while being sure to spend time with his family every evening. James started school in town, riding in with Reed each morning and coming home with stories of his lessons and friends. Sarah grew into a talkative, energetic child who followed her father everywhere, chattering constantly. In 1887, Zelda became pregnant again, and their 3rd child, a son they named Daniel, was born in the spring of 1888. The house was full of noise and laughter, the chaos of 3 young children keeping both Zelda and Reed constantly busy. But they would not have traded it for anything. One evening in the summer of 1890, after the children were finally asleep, Reed and Zelda sat on the porch of their home, looking out over the ranch they had built together. 12 years had passed since that day when Zelda stumbled into Central City, desperate and afraid. 12 years since Reed had offered her water and kindness and eventually his name and his love. "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked quietly. "Marrying me, taking on James when he was not yours?" Reed looked at her in surprise. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me. James is my son in every way that matters. I loved him from the moment I saw him, just as I love Sarah and Daniel." "He is starting to ask questions," Zelda admitted, "about why he looks different from you about his birth. I think soon we will need to tell him the truth." Reed was quiet for a moment, considering. "We will tell him together," he said finally. "We will tell him that I am not his biological father, but that I chose him, that I wanted him from the very beginning. We will tell him that family is not just about blood, it is about love and commitment and showing up every day." "What if he is angry?" Zelda worried. "What if he feels like we lied to him?" "Then we will deal with it together," Reed said, taking her hand. "We have built our marriage on honesty and trust, and we will extend that to our children. James is old enough to understand, and he deserves to know his story. But he also needs to know that nothing will change how much we love him." They had that conversation with James on his 12th birthday in December of 1890. It was difficult and emotional, with James crying and asking questions and needing reassurance. But Reed handled it beautifully, explaining about how he and Zelda met, about how he fell in love with her and wanted to be a father to her baby. "You are my son," Reed told James firmly. "I chose you before you were even born, and that choice is one I would make again 1,000 times over. Nothing about our relationship changes because of this. "You are James Reed Owens, my son, and I am proud of you every single day." James had thrown himself into Reed's arms, sobbing, and Zelda had joined the embrace. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them holding each other, reaffirming the bonds that held their family together. After that conversation, something shifted in James. He seemed more settled, more confident in his place in the family. He began to take more interest in the ranch, following Reed around and learning everything he could about cattle and horses and land management. It was clear that he intended to follow in Reed's footsteps, and Reed was delighted to teach him. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the changing seasons. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's skill for sewing and her father's head for business. She had no interest in the traditional path of marriage and housewifery, instead wanting to expand her mother's sewing business into a full-dress shop. Zelda and Reed supported her ambitions, helping her open Sarah's boutique in Central City when she turned 19. Daniel, their youngest, was the dreamer of the family. He loved books and learning, and while he helped on the ranch when needed, his heart was not in it. Reed recognized this and encouraged him to pursue his education, eventually sending him to university in Denver to study law. It was a significant expense, but Reed and Zelda both believed in giving their children the opportunities to follow their own paths. James married in 1895, choosing a sweet-natured girl named Emma who had grown up on a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the Silver Star property, and James officially became Reed's partner in running the ranch. Watching his eldest son take on more responsibility, seeing him grow into a capable and confident man, filled Reed with immense pride. In 1898, James and Emma welcomed their first child, a son they named Reed after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Reed was overcome with emotion. This was his legacy, the family he had built with Zelda, continuing into another generation. "You made all this possible," he told Zelda that night as they lay in bed. "20 years ago, I was just a ranch hand with no particular purpose or direction. And now look at what we have. 3 wonderful children, a grandson, a successful ranch, a life filled with love. All because you stumbled into Central City that day in August. All because you noticed me," Zelda corrected. "All because you were kind when you had no reason to be, because you offered me water and help and eventually your heart. You gave me a second chance at life, Reed. You gave my son a father and me a family. Everything good in my life comes from that first day when you chose to see me, really see me." They had grown older together, silver threading through Zelda's honey-colored hair and lines deepening around Reed's eyes. But to each other, they were still the young people who had fallen in love in the shadow of the Colorado mountains. The passion between them had matured into something even deeper, a love that was woven through every aspect of their lives. In the summer of 1900, they celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary with their whole family gathered around them. James and Emma were there with little Reed, now 2 years old and already showing signs of the Owens' stubborn streak. Sarah came from town with her business partner and close friend Margaret, the 2 women having built Sarah's boutique into the most successful dress shop in Central City. Daniel arrived from Denver with his new law degree and a job offer at a prestigious firm, beaming with pride. As they sat down to dinner, Reed looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most in the world. This was what mattered, he thought. Not wealth or status or any of the things people usually valued. This, right here, this gathering of family bound together by love and shared history and commitment to each other. This was success. This was everything. "I want to say something," he announced, standing and raising his glass. 22 years ago, I married the love of my life. I took on a responsibility that some people thought was foolish, raising another man's child as my own, but I have never regretted it for a single moment. James, you are my son in every way that matters. Sarah, Daniel, you are my pride and joy. Emma, thank you for making James so happy and for giving us our beautiful grandson. And Zelda, my darling wife, thank you for choosing me. Thank you for trusting me with your heart and your child. Thank you for building this life with me. I am the luckiest man who ever lived. There were tears around the table, and Zelda stood to embrace him. I am the lucky one, she whispered against his chest. You saved me, Reed. You saved both of us. We saved each other, he said, echoing the words from so many years ago. We saved each other and we built something beautiful. The evening stretched long into the night, filled with laughter and stories and the warmth of family. Little Reed fell asleep in his grandfather's arms, and Reed rocked him gently, marveling at the weight of this small person who carried his name into the future. As the years continued, the Silver Star Ranch remained prosperous. James proved to be an excellent rancher, innovative and hardworking. Sarah's boutique expanded to include a second location in a neighboring town. Daniel established himself as a skilled lawyer, eventually returning to Central City to open his own practice. More grandchildren arrived, filling the main house with noise and energy whenever they visited. Reed and Zelda gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, spending their time with each other and their growing brood of grandchildren. They took long walks through the property, remembering the years of hard work and love that had built this legacy. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains, content in the life they had created together. In the spring of 1905, Zelda fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came from town, but there was little he could do beyond making her comfortable. Reed stayed by her side constantly, holding her hand and telling her stories of their life together, reminding her of all the beautiful moments they had shared. I am not ready to leave you, she whispered one evening, her voice weak but determined. Then fight, Reed said fiercely. Fight to stay with me, love. I need you. I have always needed you. And she did fight with a strength that amazed the doctor and filled Reed with hope. Slowly, over the course of several weeks, she recovered. It was a close thing, and Reed knew they had been lucky. But it also reminded him of how precious their time together was, how every day was a gift that should not be taken for granted. They made a decision then to travel, to see some of the country beyond Colorado. They visited Reed's family in Texas, where Zelda finally met his mother and brothers. They traveled to California and saw the ocean for the first time, standing on the beach with their hands clasped and their faces turned to the sun. They went to Chicago and New York, marveling at the tall buildings and crowds of people, so different from their mountain home. But no matter where they went, they were always glad to return to Central City, to the ranch they had built and the family that waited for them. This was where they belonged, where their roots went deep into the rocky soil. As they grew into their 60s and then 70s, they watched their grandchildren grow up and begin to have children of their own. Great-grandchildren filled the house with laughter, and Reed would sit in his chair by the fire with the youngest ones climbing on him, telling them stories of the old days when he first came to Colorado and met their great-grandmother. Tell us again about how you met Grandma Zelda, one of the children would beg, and Reed would smile and begin the story. It was August of 1878, he would say, and I saw this beautiful woman standing under the awning of the general store, looking lost and alone. I offered her some water, and that small act of kindness changed both of our lives forever. He never mentioned the pregnancy, never told the children about Zelda's fear or the circumstances that brought her to Central City. Some things were private, meant only for the people who had lived through them. What the children needed to know was the important part, that love and kindness could change everything, that families were built on choice as much as blood, and that second chances were real and possible. In the summer of 1920, Reed and Zelda celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. They were both in their mid-70s now, moving slower but still sharp in mind and spirit. The whole family gathered again, 4 generations of Owens filling the house and spilling out onto the lawn. James, now 51 and running the ranch with his own son Reed Jr., proposed a toast. "To the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You built something remarkable here, not just a successful ranch but a family bound together by love and respect. Everything I am, everything I have achieved I owe to you, to both of you." Reed looked at his son, this man who had been just a possibility when Reed first proposed to Zelda all those years ago. He thought about all the moments they had shared, all the times he had tucked James in at night, or taught him to ride or helped him through difficult decisions. Every moment had been a gift, a privilege he never took for granted. "I am the one who owes you," Reed said quietly. "You gave me the chance to be a father, James. You and your mother, you gave me everything that matters." Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the extended family had departed, Reed and Zelda sat together on their porch one more time. The mountains rose dark against the starlit sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine and wild flowers. 42 years, Zelda said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stumbled into town, terrified and alone, and sometimes it feels like we have lived 1,000 lifetimes together." "All of them good," Reed said, kissing her weathered hand. "Every single one of them good." "I never thanked you properly," Zelda said. "For seeing me that day, really seeing me. For noticing what I was hiding beneath those thick shawls. For saying that my child needed a father's love and then giving it so freely. You could have walked away, could have left me to figure it out on my own. But you did not. You stayed and you loved us and you built this beautiful life with me." "There was never any question of walking away," Reed said firmly. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be part of my life. I did not know how or why, but I knew. And when I realized you were pregnant and afraid, when I understood what you were facing, the only thought in my head was that I wanted to help. That I wanted to be there for you and your child. Our child." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped. 2 old people who had loved each other through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. "I would do it all again," Zelda said softly. "Every hard moment, every fear, every struggle. I would do it all again to end up here with you, with this family we built." "As would I," Reed agreed. 1,000 times over." Reed Owens passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1923 at the age of 78. He was surrounded by family to the end, with Zelda holding his hand and whispering words of love as he took his final breath. The whole town turned out for his funeral, testament to the respect and affection he had earned over his 45 years in Central City. Zelda grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and the legacy they had built together. She lived for another 7 years, spending her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the story of how she and Reed had found each other in a dusty Colorado mining town and built a love that lasted a lifetime. When she passed in the spring of 1930, at the age of 81, she was laid to rest beside Reed in the Central City Cemetery. Their headstone was simple but elegant. Reed Owens, 1845–1923, Zelda Owens, 1849. 1930, beloved husband and wife together forever, but the true memorial to their love was not carved in stone. It was living and breathing in the family they had created, in the ranch that still bore the Silver Star name, in the stories passed down through generations about the cowboy who noticed a frightened woman hiding her pregnancy beneath thick shawls and said that child needs a father's love, and then spent the rest of his life proving it with every action and every choice. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually inherit the ranch, carrying forward the legacy of hard work and family loyalty that Reed and Zelda had established. And though the details of Zelda's arrival in Central City faded with time, the core truth remained. That love could overcome shame, that kindness could change lives, and that families were built not just on blood but on choice and commitment, and showing up every single day with an open heart. In the end, that was the story worth telling. Not the fear or the mistakes or the difficult circumstances that brought Zelda to Colorado, but the love that grew from those circumstances, the family that was built, and the life that was lived fully and joyfully despite its complicated beginning. Reed had seen Zelda when she most needed to be seen, had offered help when she most needed it, and together they had created something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. That was their legacy. That was their love story. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.